afternoon, friends, and welcome back to our Life to the Full Life, Marriage and Family afternoon show. We have got a spectacular conversation coming up. We are so very, very happy to have our guests, Dr. Byron Pirola and Francine Pirola today, and we are talking about saving the institution of marriage. Welcome. It's great to see you, Dr. Byron and Francine, and of course our friend Chris.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Can we drop the doctor? It's nothing useful.
Well, I actually have to say, and then you have the right to tell me to drop it. So thank you very much for that, Byron. I appreciate it. Okay, so when we're talking about Byron and Francine Pirola, and you say to somebody that you're going to have them on the show, they say, "Oh, you've got Catholic royalty." Is that true?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
We got more like
Catholic mafia.
Maybe Catholic mafia with our Italian roots, but I'm not sure about royalty.
That's right. One thing that I have to say, as soon as I got involved in some way, it didn't matter what you read, you started to see the name Pirola everywhere. So the one time that I actually got to see the faces to the name was at the first Renaissance of Marriage conference that I went to. I think it was in UTS, and mightily impressed. And I must admit right now that it changed not only my life, but certainly my wife Stella's life. And she says, "Yeah, that was a big turning point. That was a big turning point." So thank you very, very much for that. That's my little bit of testimony.
Oh, good.
Dr. Byron and Francine are directors of the Marriage Resource Centre, and certainly at the top of the field in terms of marriage formation. My own experience of your work is straight out of the Smart Loving Engaged course, of which myself and Stella are very, very happy to be involved with. Of course, with the Renaissance of Marriage, the top educational conference in Australia for marriage and marriage formation, with the streams for young adults, and of course the education stream as well. You've been involved in the Australian Catholic scene for quite a while. Byron, one of the founders for Antioch. And I can say that Antioch, Seven Hills, all my cousins were involved in it in those days. Francine, you've been a director for a long time of the Marriage Resource Centre, but you graduated from Fordham University.
I did.
What happened there?
When I finished my honours degree in science here, we had just married 6 months and we went overseas. Byron was working in New York with his company, McKinsey and Company, and I accompanied over there as newlyweds and did a master's degree while I was, I actually went over intending to work in a laboratory, but it didn't work out so well. So I did a master's instead.
And Byron, I promise this is the last time I mentioned the doctor part, but myself and Chris were having the conversation. What's the doctorate in? And I said to Chris,
nothing useful.
I said it's in gene technology, and Chris said, "Did he work for Levi Strauss?"
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so nothing that practical. Nothing that practical. No, I did my PhD in biochemistry down at Adelaide University of all places, which at the time was one of the Centre of Excellences in gene technology. But actually, I'm a protein chemist by training. So not that will mean to anybody anything to anybody. And I left that as soon as I graduated, and I went into corporate life. And when I said that to Chris, that you did go down to Adelaide for university, he said it must have been because of the Barossa Valley, but we'll leave that there. Clare Valley.
Okay. Clare Valley, there we go. Okay, would mind if we just start with a little prayer before we get into it? It's the great feast today of Our Lady, Help of Christians, the transferred feast to the Monday, and we're very blessed to have you on this great feast day where we have the patronage, and also the day that Archbishop Anthony has entrusted again the Archdiocese of Sydney under Our Lady Help of Christians patronage. So we might just say a Hail Mary to begin. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Thank you, Lord, for this time of conversation. We ask for your dear mother's intercession as we have this little talk. that we pray for those people who are listening, that something of what we say and something of what we learn may touch their hearts and truly bring about a great good in their own lives and the lives of their families as we pray. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Our Lady, Help of Christians, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So the title today is Saving the Institution of Marriage. A couple of statistics that I've pulled up from 2017 ABS. The rate of marriages now in Australia per 1,000 Australian residents is 4.6. It's the lowest rate ever recorded. Another statistic, most couples now live together before getting married. It's not a surprise. But when we look at 1975, the stats there, where it was only 16% of marriages were preceded by cohabitation, we're now looking at statistics which are 81%. And the last statistic I'll just note, in 1902, 97% of marriages were performed by ministers of religion. Now 78% of marriages are performed by civil celebrants. So my question, and I'll just name it in part, what's the effect that these statistics are having on society generally? What's the larger impact on the society that we're living in?
A little bit hard to separate out the chicken and the egg. Are these statistics the reflection of the impact, or these outcomes actually causing the impact? So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing there. But I think certainly the erosion of the sense of marriage as a permanent commitment, dating back to the reform of the divorce laws in the 1970s, has had a massive impact in terms of people's perception of what marriage is meant to do. And because of that erosion of the permanency, well, then cohabitation and de facto relationships have been presented as a very viable, almost the equivalent of marriage, because they were always the temporary relationships, but marriage was the permanent relationship. Well, now we're seeing those distinctions being blurred. Marriage is no longer permanent, and some couples live in de facto relationships for many decades, some of them until death. So that, I think, has sort of had a dramatic impact in the sense of trust that people have in the stability of the marriage bond, that it's become something that you can enter into and out of with the relative ease.
I mean, I think there's a general shift in society where there's an absence of permanency on many fronts. We can think about it in the job world. We were just having a conversation on the weekend with Francine's parents about the fact that when they grew up, you joined the bank, you had a job for life. Well, nobody has a job for life anymore. People don't even still don't think that way so much. When you got married for life. That was just 1902. The clergy married you and you got married for life. And, why would you even have a conversation about that? That was just the way it was. Well, that's very different from today. What impact are those things having? They're all self-reinforcing. So Francine mentioned the chicken and the egg, but I think they're self-reinforcing. And so we've got a situation at the moment where, our kids' generation coming through, and this causes a lot of heartache for us, really don't understand what marriage is. It's one of an options of how you choose to live with somebody. But if you ask them what the difference is, well, they could probably start to articulate the obvious things, but those are the legal notions. One you have a ceremony, one you sign a certificate, the other you just agree to do something, etc. Eventually you get the idea that it's permanent, but then they get confused because it's not really. You can divorce. And so if you actually ask people these days what marriage is, they sort of can only answer the question by saying what the other things aren't, but they can't actually answer the question what it is. And I suspect that was actually true for our parents and our parents' parents. Right? They didn't actually understand it culturally, it's just what you did. And somehow the culture taught you subconsciously what marriage was, because you just sort of were carried along in the culture. Whereas now you have to choose it. And the problem now with choosing something you don't understand, it actually is quite confusing. And so a lot of people aren't choosing it, not because they reject it, they just don't know what it is. So they don't even think of choosing it, or they don't know why they would choose it.
The other big contributor, of course, is the sexual revolution. And it used to be in previous generations that the sexual relationship was almost exclusively reserved for marriage. Therefore, children were born within a marriage context. And so that kind of continuity of the goods and the benefits, I suppose, of marriage were intact. Whereas now, with the separation of the exclusivity of sexual exclusivity from the marriage state, we've got also the increase in children born out of the context of marriage as well, but also there's the incentive, I suppose, to get married is not there. So that's why we're seeing people delaying marriage, and so the average age of first marriage has been getting, you know, steadily higher, and it's now up into the very late 20s, and that will probably continue as you know, people kind of look at it, the situation, and think, well, what's actually my incentive for getting married? Everything that I've wanted to do in marriage, I can do without actually getting married. I can live with the person. We can have a sexual relationship. We can have children together. We can enjoy the tax benefits that come from being married, but by just being registered as a cohabiting couple. There's not a lot of difference in the culture's eyes between the secular understanding of what marriage is and what, and, you know, a non-marital cohabitation offers.
So that's really just the state of affairs in non-Catholic circles, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm putting my tongue in my cheek a little bit here.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I reckon there'd be on most of the statistics that we care about, you can't find a lot of difference between Catholics and non-Catholics, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I mean, that's going to come up a little bit later in our questions, because, you know, we want to know, you know, what's going on here. How has this situation really come into our Catholic families as well? Like, we know that there's not much difference in terms of the perception that the children of, you know, Catholic couples in our Catholic schools even have towards marriage, this idea of permanence. My belief would be, from my time working in Catholic schools in staff rooms, that especially during the plebiscite on marriage, that there wouldn't have been much difference in the voting, you know, amongst my work colleagues than if I had worked, you know, in, say, the Commonwealth Bank, in terms of, you know, what marriage is. How have we got here? How have we got here as a Catholic church where the general everyday Catholic, when I say everyday Catholic, I'm talking about the ABS statistics, 25% of our population has the same understanding of marriage as what's out there, marriage like that, inverted commas.
Well, the culture is incredibly pervasive and aggressive. When we grew up, our parents had far more capacity to control what we were exposed to. They could screen our friendships more readily. They managed the networks through, you know, the school communities and things like that we associated with, and the, you know, the sporting groups that we played with. Whereas kids growing up these days, through their online networks, are interacting with them, you know, a global audience, and it's just impossible for parents to really manage that completely. They can go a long way towards obviously monitoring it and regulating it to a certain extent, but it's pretty difficult as parents. And I think in some ways we were raising our kids, and Steve, you're a bit the same. Chris, you're a little behind us in that you've got the advantage of being able to learn from, we felt like we got ambushed by the technology with our kids, that what we thought were just, you know, the convenience of our child having our old mobile phone that we no longer use because we'd upgraded would be great to be able to contact them to arrange the pickup. Suddenly it had all these other features that we'd never used often, but the kids knew how to use them. And they, you know, they were doing things with our old phones that we we're still just learning how to do on our new phones and things like that. So that kind of just ambushing by the technology is certainly a big feature of our relation, our kind of history.
I think that, but it's also, I think it goes a level deeper than that. I mean, I think in some ways we've got here because of our success as a Catholic community. We've become, you know, my grandfather grew up in days where there were job ads saying Catholics need not apply, right? And so we were a minority, or a sort of an
Persecuted
outcast.
minority.
Yeah, an outcast group, and then we became, you know, we overcame that. But in doing so, we became cultural Catholics, not faith-based Catholics. And when you become cultural Catholics, then effectively you are of the culture, not of the church. And so, you know, that was fine when the culture said marriage was permanent and, you know, you didn't sleep around and you didn't, you know, and fidelity was bad and infidelity was bad or whatever it might be. But as the culture shifted, effectively our Catholics shifted because they actually were more invested in the culture, and, you know, not necessarily by choice, but just by who they were. They were more invested in the culture than they were in the faith. And so, you know, if there's a silver lining in what we're going through, is that we sort of need to have a renaissance where we decide, we choose to take back what we are or what we should be. And unfortunately, usually when that happens, there's a lot of casualties. There's a lot of people who, you know, don't have the formation, don't have the capacity, don't have the upbringing, don't have the opportunity. So there's a lot of casualties in that process, and there's no guarantee you'll do it. We're people of hope, but you've got to go out and you've got to win it. So we're in a re-evangelizing world now. We're in a post-Christian era, absolutely in a post-Christian era. And usually what you find is, you know, when the faith is persecuted, people actually make a choice, and the faith becomes stronger. And usually what happens when the faith becomes the adopted part of the culture, eventually over time the culture wins over the faith because humanity drives you away, pulls you in a different direction.
Well, we get too comfortable.
Yeah,
I think, yeah. And I think it's sometimes the decisions that we have to make now for the truths of our faith aren't really as palatable as maybe, you know, what could have been accepted by an older generation who had done the hard yards and who were used to making the harder decisions. People of our generation now, where comfort is a normal thing and we seek comfort, it starts really moving into the moral sphere where it's quite relative. It's quite relative. Anyway, Chris, I don't want to leave you too quiet.
I think that this is kind of leading to the need for us to look at marriage preparation, what it's all about, because it sounds like a good Catholic formation is at the heart of these issues when we're talking about the Catholic context of how we become so similar to secular society. So with a good Catholic formation, you know, comes better and often a new understanding of even what it means to be a human at its depths, what it means to be a family, what marriage itself really is. And now we've got all these Catholic couples or couples where one member of them is lacking any understanding of a Christian anthropology, let alone a Catholic understanding of marriage. So in light of that, how important then is marriage preparation?
It's always been incredibly important, but I think we didn't see, and I think in some ways the marriage preparation we have these days is actually much better than it's been in a long time. Certainly earlier generations, the marriage preparation consisted of a few meetings with Father in the sacristy, where he explained the theological aspects of the sacrament, but there wasn't actually that whole comprehensive. You had 2 meetings, Steve?
No, 2 hours.
2 hours. One meeting, 2 hours. There we go. So we've actually got better marriage preparation now than we've had, I think, in history. And it's continuously improving, which is great. But one of the things that we don't have, that we're finding we need to do, is that we can't just make assumptions about what people already know or accept. So we think that people are coming to the Catholic Church to get married because they know and they accept that marriage is permanent. A Catholic marriage is a permanent commitment. It's not it doesn't have this option for divorce in it. But actually that's not the case, is that some people, they just see it as most couples see it as just a different venue amongst many for having the ceremony. And so we have to kind of, in some ways, go back to the very basics and cover off some of these most fundamental things that in the past we were able to just take for granted, that people accepted that and took that as a truth.
It's important because it's a teachable moment. And it's a teachable moment for two reasons. One is that we've mandated you've got to do something as a church. So, you know, nobody else, the government doesn't mandate you do anything. They just say you've got to give certain notice. But, you know, we mandate you actually got to do some training, some formation. So, yeah, that makes it a teachable moment. The other reason why it's a teachable moment is that, you know, if you spend your time with engaged couples, they're in love and they want their marriage to be successful.
Yeah.
I've often said this. I've never met anybody who gets married with the intention of getting divorced.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody starts off with a dream of getting divorced. They want it to be successful. So so as a church, we've asked them to firstly come and learn something, and you've got a group of people who, by and large, are naturally open to learning. Some might feel a little bit put out having to do a course. What you could possibly teach me? But they are absolutely open to learning, because they want to be the very best for each other. So we have a teachable moment. And I think that's the importance of marriage prep. It offers a teachable moment. Anyone who's, you know, in both teaching children or in even adult formation or adult education knows the difference between trying to instruct somebody when they don't really want to learn versus actually capturing somebody when they actually want to understand something. It's like night and day. And engaged couples, by and large, is if you offer them a way to be better lovers, to be more successful in their marriage, they will listen to you, you know, as long as you've got something to offer, right? And so the marriage prep is important, and it's important for the reasons Francine gave, and it's important that it doesn't just become theology, it becomes practical, because God wants us to be successful in our loving, not just understanding of why we're loving. He actually wants us to be successful in our loving. So good marriage prep, and as Francine said, it has improved a lot, but it has to have a dual content. It's got to actually grow. It's got to form the individual in their faith, because we're taking on a vocation, and it's got to help them practically know how to be a better husband and wife, how to be successful in their vocation. And so that's got a lot of human characteristics about it. Psychology, you know, neurobiology, you know, sort of, you know, all the things that we need to learn to be what it means to be, you know, to successfully as a man to love a woman, you know, because, you know, that's bloody hard. So, you know,
as I said to him this morning, he's lucky he has a low maintenance wife.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting her.
Did you agree?
There's only one answer to that question, which is yes, dear.
Especially when you're saying that in public.
Absolutely.
One question, I suppose, that we, you know, when we're speaking about marriage preparation in this day and age. Oh, actually, I'll say this first. One thing that we have to be grateful for as a church is that they are coming to the church. They're coming, and in a world full of so many choices, that they're entrusting their formation in this most critical, foundational time in their lives to the Catholic Church and to those of us who are involved in marriage preparation, because we know that whatever we can give them will have long-term, you know, impacts for either good or, if we don't do our job properly or carry that responsibility well, it can have an impact going forward on not just their own children, but their children's children, and to be scriptural, you know, their children's children to the seventh generation. I mean, that's true. That's true, because we know family history plays such a big part. When I look back at that 2 hours, me and Stella sometimes have a bit of a joke about it, but we know that lack of time that we spent, probably because they thought we came from two good practicing families, and we probably had been well formed. But, you know, it was in our 40s when we started looking at the smart loving content, and we thought, wow, what's the question? What's the statement everyone says? Why didn't someone tell me? You know, why didn't someone tell me? And a lot of times when we're doing the marriage preparation with couples, you mentioned, Byron, you know, the two aspects. We have the theological foundation, but also that very concrete, practical human formation. And it's when we get into that and we ask them, well, you know, step back from your busyness in the preparation about the venue and the cars and what you're going to wear and who's in the bridal party, and look at that relationship, the communication between yourselves, that things start coming up and they actually realize, you know, Houston, we have a problem. And okay, so the question is then, what is good marriage preparation, you know, in light of what the church proposes to us? And we're not moving towards marriage catechumenate yet. We'll talk about that a bit later, but at its most foundational level, what is good marriage preparation?
I think there's a couple of elements. One is that it's comprehensive, in that it addresses, we've briefly mentioned this, a number of different aspects. So you've got practical relational skills that draws on the modern psychology and social sciences. We've got the theological insights, including theology of the body and sacramental, you know, theory of sacraments and so on. And then we've got the spiritual formation and nurturing and prayerful preparation. And good preparation, I think, integrates those. You don't sort of break them up and just go to one place to do this and another place, you know, leave the priest to do the spiritual formation, but that we treat those as an integrated whole. And one of the reasons why I think that's particularly important is that we want to demonstrate to couples in this incredible evangelizing opportunity, come to us, and they're often their faith, they're not sure what place their faith is going to have in their life or in their marriage. If we integrate it, we demonstrate to them that faith can have very practical implications and benefits in their life. It helps them to take it into their own life as a daily practice, as opposed to them separating things and thinking, well, there's my marriage and then there's my faith, is what I do with it when I go to church or when I pray with God. You know, rather, we want them to understand it as an integrated whole, and that faith is something that permeates every part of their life, including their relationship with each other and their relationship with their future children and so on. So I think that's one really important element that is often overlooked in preparation. They can be good in their individual components, but they also then need to do the work of integrating them.
I'd add to that. Yeah, I'd add to that. That's about how you bring the content together, and the integration point's really important. The other thing it's got to do is be empowering. Mm-hmm. So, you know, marriage is a vocation of the church for a purpose. It's to actually bring God's presence to the world. So you actually need to empower the couple. And the way I think, so this is more about not what you teach them, but actually how you present the ideas that you teach. You empower people in two ways. One is you give them a vision. You give them a light and a hill to walk towards, and I'll talk about what that would look like in a moment. And then you give them knowledge. You give them capacity, and that's a lot of the content stuff. Too often the marriage prep stuff compartmentalizes, as Francine mentioned, but also it doesn't actually give them a vision. And the thing I think that, I mean, you know, you want to blow a young married, or not even a young engaged couple, any engaged couple, or even a married couple, you want to blow their socks off with the vision that God has for our marriage, is that we love each other as husband and wife, such that our individual experiences of God's unconditional love for the entire life that we walk this planet, the best experience, no matter how poor that experience is relative to the reality, the future reality of God's unconditional love for us, me, not us as humanity, but me as a person, is by the way, in my case, Francine loves me, and in her case, the way I love her. And the vision we have, the church's vision, and God's desire for us, is to love each other such that we, as close as we can in our human inadequacy, love each other unconditionally like he loves us. Now, if you got anywhere close to pulling that off as husband and wife, you would have one of the most beautiful marriages you could hope for. It would be extraordinary, right? Now, in our humanity, we don't do it anywhere near as well, but that's the vision. And so everything we talk about after that has to help you live that vision. And so now the content makes sense, and now the integration makes sense, because it's not just a secular, communication skill we're going to teach you, or how to make a decision as a couple. I mean, those are good things to do, but it's also the whole faith dimension, nurturing our spirituality as two people, developing the whole person. So in empowering them, good marriage prep has to empower the couple towards something. And the bar that most people think, and I don't mean this as presenters of marriage prep, but most people think good marriage prep is basically divorce prevention. Well, excuse my language, but that's a bloody low bar, right? If all our schools and universities said their primary objective of their students was to make sure they didn't fail, you'd say that's pretty low bar. How about academic excellence? How about growing the mind? Well, marriage prep has to be faced that way. So it's not divorce prevention. That happens anyway. If you do the other thing, you get divorce prevention. But you've got to have that mentality, and our marriage prep has to grasp that front and center.
Sorry.
I was going to add that the whole idea of the mission to love, it's incredibly empowering to know that God has chosen me and commissioned me. The creator of the universe, from the beginning of time, planned that I would be his instrument in revealing his love to Byron. That gives me a purpose to my life and a focus. It gives me a very specific task. And if I understand, and that's what the heart of the vocation of marriage is about, is about accomplishing God's purpose in this relationship that we have. And I think for many people, too many people, we've lost that sense. We just sort of see the vocation of marriage as inferior, I guess, to holy orders or to religious life, that somehow it's this sort of pool of people that didn't have the courage or didn't have the stamina to go for the harder vocations of celibate life. And I think in some ways that's a real, diminishes the importance of marriage for the church and doesn't actually reflect what it is truly called to be. So there's a little bit of a cultural inferiority complex that married couples can have in terms of their relevance to the church and to the church's mission and to God's call on their life that we need to sort of try and readdress.
I think the language is so important. What struck me when we first looked at the Smart Loving course was that simple phrase, which changes everything, the mission to love, that's my mission. And, whatever I do, work-wise, career-wise, my main mission in life is marriage, to make my wife know, as Byron said, and experience God's love for her and vice versa. And I think the real positive language really helps. And to actually say that so people actually get it. This is your mission. This is part of God's plan for your life, for your spouse's life, for your children's life. This is at the very heart of it. And I think Pope Francis and the Synod, with the coming forth of Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, this is such a positive vision. I know there was a lot of, controversy around, one of those paragraphs, but when we actually look at the main content, and it's almost like a revitalization for the world to look at, the positive sphere of what marriage is, that what we want it to do is bring about that great joy, and the potential's there because it's just a bringing forth of God's own life in the very heart of our families. And so that's what I love about when I hear you guys speak in our lounge room when we've got a couple there and the videos there, and this positive vision of marriage. It's not something that we've maybe the plebiscite made us have to be on the defensive, but we've really got to come forward with this positive vision. I just want to move now to the marriage catechumenate. We know that for the last, maybe not this last January, but at least on the last 5 occasions, Pope Francis has mentioned this term every year in January when he gives his address to the Roman Rota, the marriage catechumenate. And I'll just read a little sentence that he says. He says, well, this is probably the 3rd or 4th time that he said this word, I must repeat. He starts that every year. I must repeat the need for a new catechumenate. I can always imagine the archbishops and bishops out there thinking, oh, he said it again. I haven't done anything a year on. I must repeat the need for a new catechumenate in preparation for marriage. The church needed to find valid remedies for the crisis in marriage. Then he talks about grasping and savoring the grace and, key word, beauty and joy of true love. So he's giving us the language that we need to associate marriage with. How can you help us understand what Pope Francis is asking for here?
Yeah, well, the idea of a catechumenate, which is this pilgrimage kind of language in a way, it's this protracted preparation or formation period that I think it breaks us out of that thinking of, I've got to do a course. You know, we're getting married in the Catholic Church, we have to do a course. Well, no, actually what we're doing is we're entering into a process of formation. That's a different kind of language in a different sense. Is really important, and to think in terms of not just a weekend or a day to sort of get that course and get the certificate, but in terms of months, you know, the entire duration really of the engagement period is important. It actually, at the very minimum, once they're engaged, but it actually, the idea of the catechumenate is extending on the other side of the wedding into the newlywed and into, you know, mature years as a married couple, but also before that into childhood, recognizing that we're being formed in our attitudes and our beliefs about marriage from our earliest days by what we're observing in our homes, our parents interacting and the other couples in our lives. And that idea of the different stages of marriage formation is not new. That's been articulated, I think, back in the 1970s, Familiaris Consortio. I found references to it there. And even prior to that, I think probably, you know, if we went back further, we'd see evidence of this thinking of marriage for preparation doesn't just happen once the couple decides they're going to get married. It actually begins a long way before that. That's a big challenge for the church, to extend our thinking and our resources to that kind of integrated whole life cycle formation process.
I gave a talk many years ago to the Catholic youth workers from across the country. And I said to them in that talk, I said, as youth workers, your primary work is marriage preparation. If you don't understand that, you don't know what you're doing in youth ministry. Wow. And it all rocked their socks. I said, listen, let's be clear. The only reason why these young kids are turning up to youth groups is to meet boys and girls. Let's be really serious. It's not about the faith, right? But you get them at a teachable moment, and you're actually doing remote marriage prep. And if you don't understand that, then you don't know what you're doing in youth ministry. And it really caused a bit of a sort of a scandal amongst them. But it's so true, right? I mean, our kids are, you know, by the time you actually are starting to date, you have all sorts of formation lessons and beliefs about what, you know, it means to be a man and a woman in a relationship, what it means to be married. No one sat you down and instructed you on it. Parents probably never did. But you've got all sorts of, you know, this whole journey starts from the moment you're born. And I think the marriage catechumenate is good for calling it out, and it's giving it a title now. And for those of us who have been in the marriage prep game or the marriage formation game for years, we understand that it's been around for a while, but it is time. And we really love the Pope calling this out, and he's building on both Benedict and John Paul too in this area. This is a evolution of a journey on this, which is really calling out, you know, most adult Catholics spend their life in the vocation of marriage. And yet it's the most poorly formed vocation we have in the church.
It's the heart of the church.
It's the heart of the church, you know. Yeah, and the domestic church is built around and empowered by and fueled by that relationship. And so, you know, it's time. It's our time, frankly.
And it's interesting period of history we're in the pandemic, and the attention it's putting back onto the domestic church, the idea of the family home, grounded on the sacrament of matrimony as being the life source of the expression of faith more broadly. And I've got an article pinned, I haven't read it yet, from the Pop Chacks, where they're discussing this idea of, it's always been presented that the family exists to support the parish, and the families sort of, make up the parish. And to a certain extent they do, but it's actually the primary function of the parish is to support the family. Yeah. It's the family that does the formation of the faith and the raising in the faith of the children and the next generation and so on. And so the parish should be thinking in terms of not supplanting the family or replacing the family in terms of that role, but in supporting the family to really do that well and fully. It's a different it's quite a provocative idea, I think.
And Byron, what you said before about youth ministry, that's definitely so true about my journey in the faith. The very first Catholic camp that I ever went on was 100% because of a girl.
Of course.
Is she the one you married, by the way?
She's not the one I married. But I mean, it got me in. Like, I wasn't really that interested, but that got me in when I was in year 11, and I wasn't too sure what I thought of everything. And I always thought the camps were a bit crazy and a bit weird, and for the people who were a bit full on. But I really liked the girls, so I went on the camp. And that was it.
But you talked about parents' generation. Most of the Catholic marriages came out of YCS, YCW.
We're an Antioch marriage.
We're an Antioch. Yeah. It was out of Antioch. I mean, effectively, and this is a really big challenge for the moment. Effectively, is as somebody once said to us, it's sort of obvious, but you marry somebody you fall in love with. You fall in love with somebody you date. You date somebody you meet.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to the front of that pipeline. Where are you meeting people? And if you're meeting people in nightclubs and social media hookup sites,
universities, workplaces,
then what are the chances you are going to date somebody from there? Well, pretty high. What are the chances you're going to fall in love with somebody from there? Pretty high. What is the chance that you're going to marry? So you're actually, that front end of the funnel is critically important. And
part of the dynamic of that is that people delay marriage. Their links to their Catholic faith, which often ends once they graduate from a Catholic high school, if they went to a Catholic high school. From that point of graduation, all of their social networks are largely going to be in secular organisations, sports clubs, university, workplaces and so on, and recreational interests where there's not going to be a Catholic kind of faith underpinning. The chances of marrying somebody who shares your values in the faith get less and less likely. And we're seeing that reflected in the data as well, that the number of mixed faith or interreligious marriages is also increased dramatically.
And we know this too, is that in a marriage that your faith as a marriage is either you're moving you towards deeper faith or away from it. It's never static. And so it's highly dynamic. And that can ebb and flow a little bit even within a Catholic, two dedicated Catholics like Francine and I, but it's always moving. And so, if your faith isn't that important to you and you end up finding yourself swimming in pools of people who don't share faith, then the chances are you're going to be in a marriage with people who won't share something that you don't particularly value anyway. So QED. Yeah. That goes back to your beginning question about how did we end up in the place we find ourselves? Well, that's part of it.
So this is a good next step from that, going back in a circle almost. So we've been using the word marriage the whole time. But marriage means so many things now, since the change in the marriage laws. I remember being at what was it called? Faith at the Fiddler with Bishop Anthony then in Parramatta. And he did a presentation on marriage and showed us all these relationships which were called marriage, people marrying stereo systems and bridges. Is it time to maybe just make it normal that we use a term such as the sacrament of holy matrimony? you know, so maybe people can just ask that question, you know, what is it?
Yeah, it's so interesting. When we first started over 30 years ago working on our marriage education materials, we really wrestled with the language. And we actively sought to bring in sort of normal language to connect with and relate to people. And this is one of the things we talk about matrimony, we talk about marriage, and the organisation that we're part of was called the Pastoral and Matrimonial Renewal Centre. We just went, you know, that's such a mouthful. And so we rebranded as the Parish and Marriage Resource Centre. Well, in a full circle, I think you're right, Steve. I think we're coming back to a time where, to differentiate the Catholic understanding of marriage, we're going to need to adopt that language. And whether it's the sacrament of holy matrimony or the sacrament of matrimony or matrimony, we could probably use the word matrimony. We're going to need to in some way differentiate between what the secular culture defines as marriage and what the Catholic definition is.
Yeah, I mean, the culture wars and social scientists will tell you it's all a battle over language. So language matters. And I mean, I still refer to people as, you know, we'd love to see your spouse or your partner. I refuse just to use the word partner.
Yes.
Because they're different. And I think, you know, marriage and matrimony are now different. You know, you know, not in the eyes of the church, but in the eyes of society. And so at some stage you have to sort of, you know, be clear about what you mean. And so I think, you know, that's an interesting challenge. I think, but you've got to be very thoughtful about it. And maybe, you know, it's not our area of expertise, but I think it needs to be thought through. And these things don't happen overnight. But you do need to be clear about it. And things come in and out of vogue. I mean, it's kind of funny, you know, when I started in corporate life in the mid 80s, you know, we were working in the church as well in lay movements, and we would talk about visions and mission. And now corporates have visions and retreats. And now my company has a retreat, and we have a vision and we have a mission, right? So, you know, words get adopted and, you know, adapted and hijacked and taken through. So you either reclaim them or you know, build new language. But it is important. And it goes back to, I guess, the point is that we said earlier, which is that everybody I meet who falls in love wants to have a successful relationship, whether they understand what marriage means or they don't, and they're just cohabitating. Their intention is actually the same. It's imbibed in our human nature to be good at, you know, to try and make this work. People get all sorts of terrible starts in life in all sorts of areas, including relationships, and they're all doing their best. And the challenge for the church is to actually hold out something that they can grasp onto and can take them forward, and never to condemn them on it. And I think that's, you know, John Paul's great line, which I just love, which is the church does not impose, the church proposes.
Yes.
And I think, you know, our vision for matrimony, for marriage, for Catholic marriage, as we understand the word. Yeah, I don't know a human who wouldn't want that, right? They don't have to be Catholic to want that. They don't have to be Christian to want that. What the lived reality is what they want. We happen to express it through our faith dimensions, but the actual underlying reality is a human reality. And so our mission in the church is to try and find a way to, you know, as hard as it is, and sometimes it seems almost impossible, just to speak that truth to people. And, you know, taking it back to your earlier question, Kristen, your marriage preparation is a teachable moment. Yeah. You know, it's one of many, but it's the one that we find ourselves, you know, in the trenches on, and it's a fantastic moment to be working with people.
And I think the teachable moment is in the area. I'll say it this way. I think this weekend we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the movie Braveheart. When I say Braveheart, you say
freedom.
Yeah.
I was going to do a brown eye, but I shouldn't do it on camera.
Yeah, blue face. Anyway, yeah, that's John Paul too, at the very heart of him, the freedom of the human person, and actually knowing, you know, what freedom is. Before, maybe we were restricted in freedom. Now we've come to the other end of the spectrum where we think freedom is to do anything. But you said it, the freedom to choose what is true. Okay, let's get into the concrete reality of being a husband and being a wife. One thing that, again, very much struck me, I haven't kept to it, but I always remember this is what I should be doing, and I try to remember to do it every so often. You know, a little strategy, like I think you said you learnt from your father, little notes around the house, saying something, you know, words of affirmation for your spouse. So I've taken that one. Do you have another 3 little strategies that you can give for the husbands, Byron?
Oh gosh. This is where my being the perfect husband's about to come unstuck.
Daily strongest emotions, always a good one.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that are actually quite easy to do and quite profound. So the one you were referring to is just simple words of affirmation. Just, you know, I leave the house early, sometimes usually before Francine gets up. Not so much at the moment, but usually, particularly when I was traveling a lot, and, you know, just leaving a post-it note or something around the place, just saying I love you or whatever. You don't have to do it, but it's just a small thought. The other one is that, and particularly for husbands, for wives, is sharing some part of your day, some part of your emotional life. It's counterintuitive for men to do, but it's the way our wives actually really know us, is actually what's happening in our inner life, to sort of emotionally connect with us. And so just sharing your strongest feeling, your strongest emotion from the day is a real gift to a wife, to be prepared to do it. And it's not hard once you get into the habit of doing it. It's just not something we intuitively do. So when they say, how was your day? You say, fine. Because frankly, I don't really want to talk about my day and it's boring anyway, and I'm glad to be home. But if I say to Francine, yeah, it was fine. And if I can just go to the strongest feeling I had that day, the most significant thing that happened in my emotional life that day, good or bad, and just share that, then Francine has connected on the most significant thing in my inner life that day. And I've given her a window into that. And that's a real gift. So, and our wives can't get enough of that, frankly. So I think that's a really simple one. The other one, which is more for the benefit of the man to do, but I think it's important, we call it a connect hug or connect cuddle, just to hold each other for a minute. Just you know, wherever you are, in the kitchen or whatever, when you reconnect or whatever, rather than just say hi or whatever, just, you know, or when you've just finished the dishes or whatever it might be that you're doing, just to give each other a hug, you know, just to hold each other. And if you do it for a minute, and it's really worth, I mean, for the couples who are listening to this, just to try it. After about 30 seconds, you realize your entire physical disposition changes. You feel your body's relax. And it takes about 30 seconds for that to happen. This is a biochemical reaction going on as a result of the touch and the holding. And you don't have to say anything. And it just reconnects you in a way that goes beyond words. And so the first example I gave was, you know, the note is words. The second one is sharing your inner life. That's words. But the other one is just to hold each other for one whole minute. Gee golly, how hard is that, right? Well, married couples think, really? Whereas you told that to our daughter who was dating, she'd say, only a minute? Come on, Dad. You can't stop after a minute. But those 3 things can transform a marriage if you did those every day. Yes. And they're not hard. You don't have to be trained to do that.
That's perfect. Thank you, Byron. For the ladies.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, all of those things can go, obviously, be initiated in either direction. Daily appreciation is always a great starting point, and the impact can be really dramatic. So it's just sharing something that I've appreciated about Byron each day, and then more importantly, not just saying, hey, I appreciated you bringing in the garbage bins or something in the rain, which you'll do when I know you do that when you come home tonight, sweetie, so I'm just preempting it. But then saying how that impacts me.
That was a reminder.
But then also saying how that impacts me. So, you know, I appreciated it because I felt nurtured and cherished and protected by your gesture of selfless service in that. And so he's getting an insight into me, but it's a more powerful appreciation and affirmation. And it's important for me to do that as well, because it means that I'm scanning for what he's doing right, rather than getting focused on his deficits or the disappointing things. So it helps bring optimism, but also really importantly, it gives him feedback so that he knows what's making the impact in terms of loving me effectively. So, you know, it's sort of like we've got that mission, got to love in a way that communicates God's love. What does that mean practically day to day? Well, if we're giving appreciation back to feedback to each other, we're now getting a specific task. Well, one of the ways, you know, I can love Byron is by the way that he feeds back to me. So it's things like that he tells me all the time. I really appreciated that you made me lunch so that I could keep going on my calls, and I was feeling so stressed. That was a big relief to me. So I know I've got an hour job. If I can make him some lunch so that he can keep working over lunch when he's really busy, that's one of the ways he feels loved and appreciated and valued. So it gives concreteness to that. So daily appreciation. The other one is the what we call the connect kiss. So those times when we're separating for the day and reuniting are really important to help create that sense of, hey, we're a team, we're together. Particularly the coming home one, I think, is particularly important, is that sort of reset. We've been focused all day on doing our own thing and getting our own jobs done. Pretty easy to forget that we've got this mission to love. And so that connect kiss 10 seconds, just in a nice tender lip lock, helps refocus on, hey, you're the center of my life and this is what my mission is. And I think the third one that we can do is we can pray. We can pray for our spouses. We can pray for their fullness of life. We can pray to be more effective missionaries of God's, to bringing God's love to them. We could pray for the graces to be unselfish, to be patient, to overcome our limitations, to let go of our woundedness and our disappointments and offer forgiveness and so on in prayer. So I think bringing a whole backdrop of prayer to our marriage is individual prayer that's really around me trying to be the wife I'm called to be, is again a very powerful practice for bringing grace and joy into our marriage.
Beautiful.
That's 3 and 3.
I've got one more.
Yeah, go.
Coming towards the end of the time. I suppose we spoke about re-evangelizing the culture a little bit at the beginning. So for those of us who are married and we do want to place, and we're trying to place God in the center of our marriage, how do we be salt and light to the rest of the world, or to lapsed Catholics or lukewarm Catholics, and even beyond that, to present an attractive vision of what a Catholic marriage is? And I guess it's twofold. It's how beautiful marriage can be, but also how beautiful the Catholic faith that we're living together in marriage can be.
Dead easy, I'm afraid. It's dead easy, and it's really hard. You just have to be really good in your own marriage. So the best bit of parenting advice I ever had was, worry not that your children won't listen to what you say, worry more that they'll watch what you do.
Yeah.
The whole point of the sacrament is, why is it a sacrament? Marriage is a sacrament because by the way we love each other, we reveal God's love to the world. So when we're out of sorts with each other, everybody knows, and you know this, you know exactly when some married couple, somebody comes to work and you think, I wonder what happened at home yesterday, right? We are radiating our relationship out all around us. So it's a broadcast. We think we're private. It's not private, it's public. And everybody cops it when it's bad, and everybody bathes in it when it's right. And so the only thing we have to do, and this is the great simplicity and difficulty, is basically have to make our marriages work really well. And the rest takes care of itself. The priest who married us had this great line. He said, it's not until people look at Catholic marriages and say, I don't know about the Catholic Church and I don't know what they do, but I want what they have.
Yeah.
And he says they'll do that when they look at our marriages and our family life, which builds off the marriage, and they want what we have. And he says, until then, we've got nothing to give, nothing to tell them, because they won't want what we have. They won't want what we have. And so it's actually really simple, and it's really hard, right? Because we've got to make it work, and it's really hard.
Make marriage our mission.
Yeah, but you don't have to preach. You don't have to preach. You don't have to know theology. They just have to.
It's the eruption of joy that comes from that is so convincing and so powerful and communicating, as an attractiveness. So that the release of joy has to be spontaneous, and it comes from that, I guess, foundation of having a strong connection and getting those dynamics between us really working well.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I had that experience this week where, I've been trying to, work on being more tender. So, Pope Francis talks about tenderness, and my 15-year-old daughter, she thinks it's all goofy what I do, but then she said, "Dad," she said, "actually, it's really cute." And that was the greatest words of affirmation I had that week.
Yeah,
that she was noticing.
Yeah.
And
they notice.
Yeah,
they notice
Yeah.
because they know when you're out of sorts with each other.
Yeah,
they notice.
And we love. If we're giving each other a connect hug in the kitchen or something like that, or just swaying to some music together while the kids are washing up, they've got eyes in the back of their head. They're watching what's going on behind them, and we love to gross them out a little bit. There's nothing more that delights us more than to don't have the kids say, "Oh, Mom and Dad, knock it off, will you?"
Thank you. Well, look, we've come to the end of the hour, so very quickly, and we've probably missed out on another 6 questions. We knew we'd have too many. But thank you so very much for sharing, your wisdom with us, and, that wisdom shared in generosity, because what you have done as a couple, and I know that you're following a certain tradition, but you also have to choose to invest your time in that, and we thank you very, very much for that. Can I just ask you, if people want to progress a little bit in this area? I know that you have many resources that people could go to. There's people. It's interesting, this time of isolation has in some ways really strengthened our family life, but unfortunately we also know that it's really brought to the fore some issues in people's lives, and very much so in some people's marriages. What resources do you have maybe that you like to mention? How can people access them?
Well, the first thing to know is where to go. So if you just go to smartloving.org, everything is available there. We've got lots of things happening for this time at the moment. Our breakthrough course, which is one of our most powerful courses specifically for individual spouses who are in stressed or hurting relationships, that's on sale at half price at the moment until the end of the month. So that's a great one to pick up. It's got some beautiful video production, is really powerful little program. And we've also made our sponsor course, which is designed to accompany the engaged on their journey to marriage. We've made that free for anybody, any couple who's remotely interested. They don't have to make a commitment to becoming a sponsor, but if they just want to do something to strengthen their marriage and also grow and nurture their faith, the sponsor course is available free up until, well, at least till the end of June, maybe longer. So that's another one that people can access free of charge, and some of the things we've talked about today are addressed in that course as well, and they can just work through that at home and give their relationship a little bit of a brush up, and who knows, at the end of it, if they kind of feel switched on by it, like you and Stella did when you first came in contact with Smart Loving, it inspired you to want to invest more in that, well, then they'll be trained and ready to go to walk with an engaged couple towards marriage.
Okay, any last words of wisdom, Byron, before we say goodbye?
No, just it's a great journey. It's complicated as hell, as I said before, our calling, doesn't matter when you come to understand the fullness of the vocation, and frankly, we're all still learning it. Even we're still learning the depths of it as we go. But it doesn't matter when you come to it. It's never too late to go, to really embrace what the real vision of marriage is, and the sooner we do it, the better. But any time's as good as any time. So married, engaged, old folks like us, doesn't really matter. There's always something more we can learn to be better for each other.
Always something more we can learn. With that, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you so very much. Thank you, everybody, for watching us this afternoon. And is it possible to save the institution of marriage? 100% it is. We've just got to care enough about it and make that decision that we want to do that. So thank you, everybody, for being with us. Thank you, Byron and Francine. And good afternoon and God bless.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Steve.
See you later all.
Bye-bye.
God bless. Ciao.